Hi, my name is Tammy French. Today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 7, Gathering Materials out of the Art of Public Speaking. If you'd like to watch this entire presentation with closed captioning, please visit the COMMUNIC8 submenu on the UW-TV website at uwwtv.org. So, gathering materials, that means research. How do you feel about research? I know for me, personally, sometimes research can be kind of an R word, meaning research for the sake of research, it's really a drag. It's something that on its surface, I sure don't enjoy. And maybe some of you feel the same way. But you know what? We do research all the time without thinking about it as if it's research. So play out with this scenario with me for just a minute. Let's pretend that you are a student who lives on campus at Whitewater. And your parents maybe are coming up and they want to take you out to lunch. They want to take you out for a nice lunch, right? And so you're thinking, okay, well, there's always Culver's, but it's the parents, so maybe we can step it up a little bit. How do you figure out, if you're not from the area, how do you figure out where to go? Well, some of you might, I don't know, ask someone. So if you've got a friend or a classmate who is from the area, you might say, hey, what are some good places to eat, right? Get some feedback there. Some of you might, if you've got a Royal Purple sitting around, you might pick up the Royal Purple and check that out. Some of you might Google it. Just Google nearby restaurants or go to Yelp and see what some of the ratings are. Every single one of those things that I just mentioned that you would do to figure out where to go to eat, that is research. It doesn't seem like research when you're doing something like picking a place for lunch, but it's research. Now, in a previous chapter, I talked a little bit about how careful we should be when choosing a topic. And part of the reason we should be careful is because of this research piece. If I'm researching something that I kind of like, it's not nearly as painful as if I'm researching something that I picked out of a hat and I'm not very interested in. Now, lots of students want to ask, well, what about my own knowledge? Maybe your speech topic has to do with something within your major and you actually know a lot about it. Well, that is terrific. And yes, your own knowledge is really, really important in your speeches for a couple of reasons. First of all, your own knowledge is going to help you determine what is something that should be in your speech versus what is something that we should keep out of your speech. Your own knowledge is going to be important in figuring out how to frame up your speech. How should I have those 3 points? What 3 points are the most important? And your own knowledge will be really, really useful within your main points to help give your speech some personal touches. But your own knowledge is not enough in your speech. So instead of you just talking all by yourself about what you know, we want you to reach to some other experts. I'm thinking of a speech I heard several years ago now from a student whose family owned a Christmas tree farm and they sold trees, and she was a big part of that business. She would help with the sales and helped with the planting and the growing, and it was a really, really interesting speech. I mean, many of us go and cut a tree down, or maybe we aren't doing it for a holiday, but we need a tree in our yard and so we're going to buy a tree. In either case, I doubt that we've spent a lot of time thinking about what a tree farm actually takes to grow and to be a business and so forth. So she had a lot of inside knowledge. It was really, really an important part of her speech, but it wasn't the only thing she had. She was able to also call in other sources to talk about what is the optimal watering and sunshine needed for a good evergreen to grow, and so on and so forth. So while your own knowledge is really important, we also want you to call on other things. And that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Now, many people think about research and they immediately think about the library, which is a great resource. And there are many, many useful things we can get in our library. But I really want to focus on that number one bullet point right there, the librarians. Sometimes we don't adequately utilize the people that have very specific degrees in research. I mean, that's literally what your librarians have most of the time. And so whether you're having trouble with your topic and you're just stumped as to finding what kinds of sources you could use, go to that person. Or maybe it's a case of you know what you want, but you just don't know where to find it. In either case, the librarian can be a really great source, as well as some of those other things, different kinds of references, certainly newspapers and periodicals. There's obviously thousands of newspapers and periodicals that you and I have probably never heard of, as well as academic databases. So we want to take advantage of all of those different kinds of sources, whether we're checking into an online library or whether we're going person to our Anderson Library here on campus. Now, so many of us defer to this both blessing and a curse called the internet when we're trying to do research. And the internet really is both. Certainly it can be amazing when we're trying to find materials. We can find materials from all over the globe. And so the world is our oyster in that way. But as I know you've heard before, there's a lot of junk on the internet. There's a lot of false, literally false documents on the internet. So we really have to be careful. When we're looking in the internet, one thing I'd like you to think about is some of the different search engines you use. EBSCOhost is a really big, very common search engine that people will use when you're looking for your scholarly sources. You know you need to use one scholarly source on this other upcoming speech, as well as two of them in the next speech. So we need to learn a little bit about how to do that kind of academic research. How can I find a peer-reviewed academic journal? We're not talking textbook, but a journal. How do I find that? And EBSCOhost is one of the great search engines you can use. There's, of course, other kinds of specialized sources that you can turn to, but I do want to caution you against some of these sources like Wikipedia. There's like ask.com and those kinds of websites. They're not useless. I won't say that, because frankly, if you come across something and you have no idea what it is, or maybe it's a person's name and you have no idea anything about this person, they can give us very quickly a glimpse as to what that person or place or thing was all about, and that can be really helpful. But those kinds of websites can be very simplistic for our use as college scholars, as college researchers. Now, I'm sure you've heard this trick before, but in Wikipedia, for example, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of one of their articles, they often have the sources that they used to create their article. And sometimes those can be actually very helpful. But we do not want you to say, according to Wikipedia. We don't want to hear that in your speech. Again, this isn't high school, this is college, so we want you to dig deeper. We want you to find a little higher quality sources. Now, as I mentioned before, whether you're finding a source that's in paper or whether you're finding a source online, we do want to think about how to evaluate what we found. Is it any good? What are some of the things I need to consider? One of the first and most important is authorship. Who is the author? I'm going to tell you right now, in our class, you have to have an author for any source you use. Now, the author can be a person or it could be an organization. So maybe you found something from Dr. John Smith, or maybe you found something from WebMD. Either of those are fine authors because it's a person or an organization. But as we were alluding to before on the internet, sometimes you can find just junk that has no attribution. In other words, it has no person or organization that is willing to stand up and give the source credibility, and that's what we're really looking for. We need to have an author in order to decide how credible is this. We also want to think about who the author is and if that author is a credible source on this topic. The next one is sponsorship. This has to do with who is sponsoring the website, perhaps, or the document, as well as what affiliations it has. So does it have ties, does the article or the author have ties to different groups that might make the article biased? Is it sponsored by something? You know, if I'm doing my speech and it has something to do with automobiles and I find an article, but it's sponsored by the Ford Motor Company, I know that I have to acknowledge that this article is, I'm sure, biased towards Fords and towards those kind of vehicles specifically. So I need to make sure that I'm finding the most objective sources I can. And lastly, of course, is recency, which simply means that you take into account what date you are finding for your source and how old it is. Now, again, teachers differ a little bit on how they feel about how old your sources are. Certainly, when possible, we want to use the most recent sources we can find. If my topic has to do with cell phones, if I had a source from like 2012, I might question the value of that source because that's a long time ago, and I think cell phones have changed just a little bit since then, haven't they? However, I've had lots of students do speeches on historically based topics. I can think of one really interesting speech I had a number of years ago where the student was explaining a fascinating story about a person who actually escaped from Auschwitz, the Jewish concentration camp, and just amazing. I had never heard the story before, and it was a terrific speech and a terrific topic. And naturally, since it was such a World War II based topic, most of those sources were very, very old. And of course, that was appropriate. So with this whole piece of recency, when you're finding your source, make sure that it's as current as you can make it. Make sure that it fits the topic and that it's appropriate. So we think of different kinds of sources we might come up with. One that I want you to really, really consider is the research interview. So what does this mean? The research interview is where you go to an expert and you interview that person, and that person becomes one of your sources. Now, on a college campus such as ours, what a great place to do this kind of an interview, whether you do it face-to-face or through WebEx or through email exchanges. You have at your fingertips a whole mess of college professors that are experts in their field. And this can be really, really helpful, especially if you're simply not finding what you need to find through conventional research methods, through the library, for example. We have, again, history professors on campus, communication professors on campus, as well as, of course, just name the topic, and we've got someone on campus that can talk to you and will most likely be willing to talk to you. So please consider using a research interview, whether you've got this person as your own instructor or not. Most of the time, if you've give someone enough warning, enough time, and you're very polite and professional about it, most professors would be more than happy to spend some time talking with you about that topic. So please don't forget that that's a great, great way to go. Now, when we're thinking about our research, there's a couple things that I want you to consider. First of all, start early. I've mentioned more than once in some of these lectures that if we wait until the last minute, that's when that's when we might be inclined to cut corners, and that can lead to bad things like plagiarism or just poor work. So in the case of writing a speech and developing an outline and putting together a presentation, this is a multifaceted process. There's a lot of pieces that need to come together to make my speech great. And one of the big pieces is starting early with my research, so I know what I can find, so that I have time to schedule that research interview if that's what I want to do. Or I have time to really be thoughtful about my sources. Sadly, it's not uncommon for us to figure out that the student has simply picked the first 3 websites that happened to come up when they did an online source. And that kind of stinks. We want to not just pick the first thing, we want to pick the best thing. So start really early. Think about the materials you're choosing and choose a variety of sources. We, again, often, just because we're trying to do it quickly, we often will defer to websites. Because again, we go to our computer to start our research, and there's millions of websites, right? But let's be careful about that. I really, really urge you to use a variety of things. And at this point, I should explain really quickly that there is a difference between a website and a web-based source. So for example, if you take a paper like the New York Times, a newspaper, a paper that you can physically hold in your hand, that also comes as a web-based source. You could find it, you can look up articles on the New York Times online. And that's a great source. That's a very credible source. That is different than something that's a website, something that only comes in a computer form, if you will, and you can only get it in that one way. So web-based sources, I mean, frankly, some of the scholarly journals you're going to find are going to be web-based sources, and those are terrific, and those come in a large variety themselves. But I really urge you to avoid just using all websites in particular. That seems to be the one that students often will accidentally do. And that just leads to often your source work being very kind of dry, very sort of overly consistent and not having enough variety of perspectives, variety of formats. And we really want you to get away from that. And then lastly, as you do your research, and you are going to thank me if you take me up on this suggestion, make a preliminary bibliography. So what this means is as you're digging, whether you're sitting at the computer or whether you're in the library, as you're doing your digging and as you're finding things, start to type up that bibliography. Start to type it up. Even if you don't have your APA format exactly in your mind, at least get the authors down, get the title of the journal and maybe the title of the article down, get the dates down, and get the website down. If you just start with those pieces, you can arrange them in the proper way later. But then later, when you're finishing up that preparation outline, your bibliography is practically done. That you can cut and paste it from whatever document you had it in and put it as the last page of your outline, and you're just about done. This is so smart for two reasons. Number one, time. You have saved yourself a ton of time when it's the day before the outline is due and you're tightening things up and you're cleaning things up. Your bibliography is almost done. But the second reason this is really important, and I've kind of alluded to this earlier, is sometimes we lose track of some of the great research we've done. We maybe are in a situation where we've pulled up all these screens, and on my laptop I've got all these things pulled up, and now I can't remember where that graph was or where that great quote was or whatever it is I want. I can't seem to go back and find it, and doggone it, can that be frustrating? Well, if I've started to make a preliminary list of my sources in this preliminary bibliography, it's much more likely that I've got a couple places I can go back and check now. So those kind of pieces of research can be really, really useful. The biggest thing is with gathering materials and doing our research, folks, is that we try to have some fun with this, that we try to really look at this as an opportunity. I've picked a topic I like, so this is an opportunity for me to learn more about this topic that I like. And therefore, I'll be able to share what I've learned with my classmates who are also going to find it very fascinating. Of course, as always, if you're running into any trouble with any of this, please see your teachers, and all of us would be glad to help you. Maybe point you in some directions with your gathering materials, whether it's just for your regular sources or whether it's for those scholarly sources. So, if you'd like to watch this entire presentation with closed captioning, please visit the COMMUNIC8 submenu on the UW-TV website at uwwtv.org. Thank you.